On the third Sunday of Advent, we light the shepherd's candle and think of their great joy when they heard the good news. What might be good news for you? For some of us, it might be that our favorite sports team has won, that a new Star Wars show is coming. Maybe it's getting a good score on a big project, or encouraging news about vaccines. How would you feel right now if someone announced that the virus was gone and everything would go back to normal again? That would be pretty incredible, right? Would you think that that's nice and then go about your day? Probably not. You might start celebrating, jumping with excitement, eagerly start planning all the things you want to do. You might share the good news with others, start planning visits with them. Maybe you would imagine all the ways that things have changed and now how this will change everything again. If we imagine all that, I think we might just have a glimpse of how the shepherds felt as they watched over their sheep. I don't think they saw the angels, heard the good news, thought that was nice, and then went back to planning their dinner. I think it was so exciting, so extraordinary and wonderful that they immediately had to react. They might have shouted for joy, danced with a sheep or two, cried with relief, and then right away began to tell others. Not because it was a duty or on their list of things to do, but because it was so life-changing, so amazing, they couldn't wait for others to share in their joy. I like to imagine that part of that joy they had was not just in the good news, but in getting to share it with others. It's definitely exciting when we get good news for ourselves, like a good test score. But is it fun to just keep it to ourselves? Not nearly as much as when we get to share it. I think that was part of the shepherd's joy as well, not just in receiving the good news, but also the gift of joining in the excitement of sharing it with others. Every year at Advent, we get to join in the excitement of the shepherd's good news. We celebrate not just the joy of presents or giving presents to others, but also in the arrival of Jesus that changed everything. We don't know if the shepherds ever got to hear Jesus teaching in the synagogue, healing those in need, or even got to share in the news of his resurrection on Easter. But we do know that even though they weren't famous, they got to be a part of one of the most incredible stories in the world. We too get to be a part of that story. The news of Jesus wasn't just good news for people back in Bible times. It is good news for us today. It reminds us that incredible story the angels imparted to the shepherds is still important to us today. That we are invited to share in the joy of the shepherds, the joy of the good news of Jesus, and the joy of sharing that news with others. As we go through this week of joy, I wonder what brings you joy, and how might you share that joy with others?